and welcome to the Be Glad movement. My name's Pollyanna and I am on a mission to bring you as many stories as possible of good coming out of bad and reasons to be glad. And today I'm down in London with this absolute legend, Jamal. And Jamal, you're going to tell us about how your career didn't pan out maybe as you had originally planned. So you were in the Paras as a reservist originally when you were at uni, weren't you? And then tell us a little bit about what happened.
That's right, yeah. So I was, just to make ends meet at university, I was with 4-Para, which is a reservist unit, and I really enjoyed that. So when I graduated, I decided to join the Royal Marines, and I was in training for a period. I was injured. It didn't quite work out the way I'd originally sort of, planned it.
So you injured your knee during training, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it was just a training accident. I was hit in the knee with the butt end of a weapon. It was a complete accident. Right. And so after, I guess, 9 or 10 months of training, I was sort of back-batched, as they call it, at Livingston, which is where you put back a year, or put back rather into the following year's training intake. Uh-huh. So I came out of training for, I suppose it would have been something like 5 months, and then back in the following October, where I proceeded to do about another 8 or 9 months of training, and then my knee relapsed. It never really made a full recovery, so I was forced to leave.
Wow. So that must have been quite frustrating, not only like the first time having to leave the guys that you joined with, they went on and finished training and you had to wait and rejoin almost, or go through with a different batch, but also then to start with that batch and still to miss out on the career that you'd chosen. Can you remember sort of how you were feeling at that time?
Yeah, it was pretty devastating, actually. I mean, I say that sort of with a caveat that I understand that, some of the people that you're interviewing have had to cope with real tragedy. I'm not one of them. But relatively for me, it was quite a setback because I wanted to be a Royal Marines officer from the age of 12 or something. And so I hadn't really ever thought that it wouldn't work out. And of course, my closest mates in the world were at that point that, and still are actually. Yeah. So my thoughts at the time were that I'm obviously losing my sort of lifelong career aspirations, but also I thought probably as I move on, there'll be a greater difference between me and my mates. I'll probably start to lose touch with them. Yeah. I'll move away from my current home here in Devon, and so it was quite a setback for me personally. Not a tragedy, but
sure.
But just a setback.
Yeah. It's still a loss though, isn't it? When you've set your heart on something and then suddenly it's not going to happen. It's quite a lot to deal with. Yeah,
definitely. You do feel a little bit like the ground's being sort of pulled from beneath you in terms of your identity is based on your career, your sort of circle of friends, everything. So yeah. But I suppose in the spirit of the Be Glad movement, I sort of I was fortunate enough to have very good support around me at the time. So at Livingston, every officer trainee gets what they call a sponsor officer, which is a sort of somebody who's been in the Royal Marines, been through what you have, and they're there as a sort of mentor, I suppose. Sure. But somebody who's since left service and can be completely impartial mentor.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I was lucky enough to have had a really fantastic guy called Charlie Hobson, who was a former brigadier in the Marines who also had sort of ran the Royal Marines Association, which is the core charity, and he was a great source of help and inspiration, and essentially put the onus on me to not forget the things I'd learned in training, in particular about cheerfulness, adversity, and so on. Right. And essentially just hit the next phase of my life with the same amount of effort and enthusiasm as I had in training, not just to sort of feel sorry for myself or anything like that. And I think that's the common thread between a lot of the people that you've interviewed, and like I say, many of their stories are much more difficult in circumstances than I was faced with. But and I think that's one of the really positive things that comes with dealing with a setback, that you learn how to deal with future setbacks, but also you it gives you a complete and utter sort of paradigm shift in terms of, the things that you value. And that's been again a huge learning experience and something that I've benefited from massively since then.
Yeah, so I don't think you should underplay it, because sometimes when people are, when they've 100% got their heart set on something and then it doesn't happen, it can, it can be devastating. And I always say this at the end of each video, but I really do think that someone telling their story about how they went through that and came out the other side could just be reaching someone at that critical point when they need to hear that maybe all isn't lost. Because I know you've still gone on to have a very successful career, albeit not in the original field that you originally wanted. So
yeah. I mean, we all have a series of ups and downs, and I've whilst I was fairly unlucky at that point, I was also been subsequently very lucky since then. And so yeah, I suppose in terms of the good coming out of it, I went on to start a fundraising campaign for wounded servicemen called Jump for Heroes, and then after that I did a master's in post-war reconstruction, and I ended up working in Afghanistan as a stabilisation advisor, and then for the Foreign Office for running the Syria programme there, the programme of activity that was supporting the opposition. And then I worked at the Commission for International Justice and Accountability as the Chief of Staff, and each and everything that I've had the opportunity to do over the last few years has been really interesting, and I would never have had any of those opportunities had I stayed in the Corps, and I would have had a very different type of career. But my point is, for me personally, it's been probably, if anything, more suitable for me and allowed me to do more of the things that that offer me the things that really motivate me intrinsically, to travel, to really sort of achieve that sort of career fulfillment than I probably would have done in the Corps. I don't know. It's difficult to compare like for like, and
Exactly.
Many of my closest mates have had really interesting careers as well. Some of them less so, and some of them are getting frustrated and want to get out. So it's a mixed bag. So that the staying inside would not necessarily have been the be all end all I thought it would have been at the time.
Right.
I would have had a really interesting few years, I think, probably as a troop commander. Then I would have had some difficult decisions to make about what to do next. So those things were sort of forced for me, and as a result, like you say, I've kind of been quite fortunate to have had quite an interesting run of things over the last few years. So it turned out okay in the end, I suppose.
So you had this guy Charlie was your mentor, and he kind of told you to carry on with all those core values that you'd learned through training. If you were talking to someone that didn't have a Charlie, what would you say to them if they were going through, they just lost the career that they were dreaming of, or lost a job, or like, what would you say to someone that was going through the same as what you went through back then?
Well, I'd be very conscious not to say what people were saying to me at the time, with absolutely the best intentions. Don't worry, one door will close and another one will open up. Actually, that's the absolute truth. You can't see it at the time when you're in the thick of an immediate setback. But I think the most important thing is to immediately just recognise that this has happened, and there's no point in just sitting around feeling sorry for yourself. Best thing is just to plot out now what the next best course of action will be. And probably that won't turn out the way you exactly plan it either.
Right.
But by being very proactive and gripping the situation, it gives you the opportunity to really make the most of it. And I think that one of the reasons I really like the idea of this Be Glad movement, and the reason I sort of agreed to be involved in this and supporting it, is because I think that now more than ever we are sort of constantly forced to only reflect on the negatives in life. A feature of all the communications that we read, see, hear about are generally fairly negative, either because they come with an agenda, marketing that tells you the skin's not right, that you're too fat, that you're not clever enough, or whatever. There's a lot of pressure on all of us in our society now, just the sort of high performance culture that we live in, where we're all forced to be very self-critical. A feature of the media which is also very negative. social media, which is increasingly negative, and
Yeah.
when you're online you tend to see and hear only like the best of people's lives, and you find yourself comparing yourself to those things. And I've taken quite an interest in behavioural science over the last few years. I had another sort of relapse of my knee, which actually ended up with me having surgery and sort of being sat on my sofa for about 10 weeks with my leg in a big splint. And that in itself turned out to be a really good opportunity as well, because I sat and did loads of online courses on behavioural science, and I've learnt a lot about the psychology of happiness, and most pertinently, it's easy to form either good or bad habits when it comes to thinking about situations.
Yeah.
And I think that there's obviously an element of us all naturally being predisposed to a certain amount of positivity or negativity, and that's just something you can't do anything about. That's in your genetics. But beyond that, I think it's all about forming good or bad habits, and it's just as easy to form good habits of positive thinking as it is to form bad habits about negative thinking. It's useful up to a point to be self-critical. But I think beyond that, negative thoughts are really only detrimental.
Sure.
And I think that being self-congratulatory, giving yourself a break, living a fairly sort of healthy diet, healthy lifestyle, certain amount of exercise, being hydrated, making time to reflect, making time to plan. There are a whole raft of different things that you can do to get yourself into good, positive habits about positive thought. And those habits that I think all people who are generally content in life are content because of.
Yeah.
Even if you take it back to the absolute bare basics of Maslow's hierarchy and that kind of thing, beyond the absolute basic sort of things that you need for survival and for security and safety and general welfare, all of the higher order effects linked with general satisfaction are about esteem and belonging and things which really are quite heavily dependent on perception, your own self-perception of yourself and where you sit amongst others and so on. So, and this stuff is no dark art really. It's about just giving yourself a break and
Yeah.
So. I think it's a really great thing that you're doing, Polly. I think encouraging people to be more positive is extremely powerful, actually. More powerful than I think people would realise until they've been in a difficult situation.
Sure, yeah, it's quite often the way, isn't it? I love the fact that you didn't just waste that time when you were sat with your leg up having to rest, and you did all that, because I think it's quite often people can get into a downward spiral of feeling sorry for themselves, or thinking about what they can't do rather than what they can do.
Yeah.
So I love that you've managed to get all of that.
Well, again, that was learnt behaviour. I think it's probably the first setback that made me realise that actually might as well grip this as an opportunity. And therefore that was sort of on autopilot when I did it second time around. I was like, I've been, heavily stressed with work. I've been away from home. I hadn't had the opportunity to do all this stuff, and I literally just got my laptop out on the first day and just thought, I'll just make a list of all the stuff that I haven't had the chance to do recently, because I'm otherwise going to be housebound.
Sure.
So yeah, it's I think that's just an example of just being on, good habit forming rather than being stronger and being able to deal with the situation. Nobody's strong really. It's just about habits.
Yeah, talking about habits, I describe it as like muscle building. You can't just go to the gym once and expect to be a bodybuilder. You have to keep going, and with building up good habits, you have to keep practicing, don't you? It doesn't just sort of happen overnight. You do have to sort of eventually it becomes second nature, but at first, if you're not used to doing it, you have to sort of work at it to get it as part of your habit system. Definitely.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good analogy. I like that. And I suppose like with any sort of physical training as well, like nobody's alone on that journey. I suppose having good people around you and supporting people who are also not been through great times is it's very necessary for us to do as well.
Cool. Well, thank thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, then please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and you'll get the notifications as soon as anything is uploaded. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. If you just search at Be Glad Movement, you should be able to find us. And if you've got a story to share, it doesn't matter if it's similar to anything that somebody else has already said. I truly do believe that there's someone out there that needs to hear your story in your words, in your voice, and it might just touch them at the moment when they need that encouragement and support. So thanks for watching, and I will catch you in another episode.